In this series of podcasts, we'll be featuring presenters and past practitioners of the ECIS PE conference. So my name is Dominic Dalle. I am the chair of the ECIS PE SIG Special Interest Group, which is a committee that helps organize the PE conference. And this year's PE conference is going to be held at Frankfurt International School in Germany. And I'm really pleased to have one of our keynote speakers here, Dr. Emily Meadows. I just want to explain that this is the third in a series of podcasts leading up to this ECIS PE conference this year. And the idea is to feature our keynote speakers so that we can highlight what they're going to be talking about at our conference. In this episode, as I said, we'll be speaking to Dr. Emily Meadows, and Emily will be talking about the importance of gender inclusion in phys ed and after school sports. So I'm going to ask Emily to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about what you do in the wider context of your work within the international school system.
Thanks, Dom. Thanks for hosting me on your podcast, and thanks to ECIS for the warm welcome. Yes, I'm Emily Meadows. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an LGBTQ consultant for international schools. So what that means is that I work with schools really all around the world to develop policies and practices, systems and structures to build safety, equity, and belonging for LGBTQ school community members. So that's the basic gist of my work. And for this particular conference, where I'm excited to speak with the participants about bringing gender equity and really specifically looking at transgender inclusion to sports and athletics at our international schools.
Okay, so you've outlined your keynote. What I want to know is, why is this important in schools, but in particular in the makeup of an international school? And we all know that international schools are very different in different countries, different regions of the world. So why is it so important in international schools?
Yeah, well, sort of two parts to that. I think it's actually important in all schools, but my background is international schools. So that's why I do this work where I understand it best. So I grew up in international schools. I was a student in international schools as a child, and I've done all of my doctoral research and dissertation was around LGBTQ safety, equity, and belonging in international schools specifically. I worked for many years as a counselor in international schools, and now my private practice is entirely centered on international schools. So it's not that we're necessarily more important, but it's just that's where my impact is. But I do think that there are some things that are a bit unique around international schools. So the first being, why is this important generally to schools? We know from quite a lot of research now that LGBTQ people, youth, have much higher rates of some really important and significant negative health and mental health outcomes. And this risk is heightened, particularly for transgender youth. And so we can see things like depression, anxiety, even self-harm and suicidality are significantly increased in LGBTQ youth. We know now why that is too. It has to do with the stigma, the discrimination, and the marginalization that queer kids experience in their daily lives. And so knowing that that is both a risk and knowing why that risk exists allows us to address it, to intervene and to correct it. And the best ways that we know how, the most effective, what we call protective factors, are measures to reduce the stigma and the marginalization. So those can look like different things in different aspects of the school, but when it comes to sports, we know that including students in participation is a tremendous benefit and can help reduce those negative outcomes. In international schools specifically, there's two pieces that come to mind as being a little bit unique. One is that we support families who might have left their communities behind in a completely different country. And so a lot of times when families come to our schools, the school is the beginning of their community. It's their hub, it's their place to meet people, and especially for the children, to have a sense of safety and belonging and rootedness in what might be a completely foreign place for them. So really building on that belonging in international schools is a bit different, I think, than for, say, a local school that has repeated generations of the same family over and over. But the other unique aspect is that we have a number of different laws and cultural expectations that we're managing in an international context that we need to be aware of whenever we're implementing any new policy. But given the politicization of LGBTQ inclusion at the moment, we need to be aware in whatever country where we're operating and the families that we're working with, what those expectations and restrictions are, so that we can, of course, excuse me, translate this research into practice in a way that is culturally sensitive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a key point, and we have both worked in various parts of the world, and there are those things to consider: the local government, culture, and parents as well involved in the school, and what they think and believe. Can I ask if you can give me some examples of where your work has been successful?
Well, measuring success is a little bit interesting when it comes to LGBTQ inclusion, because the people that we're most interested in serving, of course, are LGBTQ folks. I especially am interested in children and youth. And a lot of times these kids are hidden by choice within our communities. So knowing what our impact isn't always easy to measure. We don't always know who's receiving the benefits of this work. So that's just something to name and to put out there, that we might not know even how much harm is being experienced by these students because they don't feel safe reporting. The good news is, however, that we have, as I mentioned before, a number of what we call protective factors that we know from research on broad scale studies and in larger context can be impactful and are impactful in reducing negative outcomes for LGBTQ children. So I do consider it a success when these protective factors are implemented, even if I can't check in with each individual child who might be benefiting from them. So I work with a lot of different schools and organizations, and I think I'm going to avoid naming names particularly here, but where I've seen some success is when schools have managed to put through, for example, a policy that allows transgender children to name the gender affirming name and pronouns that they would like the school to use for them when they're on campus. And even in very culturally conservative contexts, we can sometimes work with the community and with the school. And if there's leadership who really believes it's safety for all students, we can push that through. And so I've seen that happen in a number of schools that I think, 5 years ago wouldn't have dreamt of it. There are some individual examples like that, but also, speaking of 5 years ago, it wasn't that long ago when I told people what I did for work, they would just sort of blush and look down at their shoes. And that has changed. It has changed tremendously, where there's now really an acknowledgement of the need for this work. And that is also in itself progress, to see a number of allies and advocates working to build safety for all people on school campuses.
Thank you. That really helps outline, what is being thought of in and then across some of the schools that are trying to address some of the thoughts of and helping their students. Got a couple of questions here. I'm going to ask the second one I thought of here, because it might link a little bit to what you were saying. How would you encourage educators in regions of the world that do not necessarily allow discussions of LGBTQ plus to address issues that they are concerned with, so that they can help their students?
Mm-hmm. Yep. As I said, I work with schools really all around the world, and there are some legal restrictions. And obviously, if we get a school shut down, we're not doing anyone any good. So working within those restrictions without sort of giving up all hope and throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying, well, we can't possibly hear. We can. There are things we can do. So one that I encourage really for all schools, not just in socially conservative or religiously or legally conservative context, is to think about how we're representing gender overall and to help challenge gender stereotypes. So this can be done literally anywhere. And it's great for all kids when children are able to see representations, for example, of girls and women beyond just, let's say, caretakers, or beyond sort of wives or objects of attraction or affection from men. That opens doors for girls to do all kinds of things, including straight girls, Similarly, we often talk about representation, the benefits of representation for girls, but similarly, boys, cisgender straight boys, have a number of gender norms that are equally restrictive for them in different ways. So boys who are given the impression that, they have to sort of man up or be a man, that prevents them from feeling comfortable to be vulnerable with their friends, or to be close or affectionate with their friends, to build those kinds of relationships, or to experience the full range of human emotion, right? To have those experiences that are seen as more feminine, but really are just human. And so when schools allow kids to see lots of different ways that gender can be experienced, that's great for everyone. And that's not something that most cultures are going to push back on. Another piece, Dom, you asked for encouragement. Another piece of encouragement specifically for educators working with LGBTQ children in a context that might be really restrictive is a reminder that, I keep coming back to these risk factors, but they're real. And we also have evidence to show that even just one affirming adult in an LGBTQ child's life can make a huge difference for that kid. So long-term, we want entire school communities to be supporting every child, right? Regardless of identity. But short-term, if what you can do, given the restrictions of your job, is show up as an individual for that one kid and to affirm them, please know that that is not a waste of your time, and that is still significant, and that you're probably doing more than you realize.
All right, I've got one more question here. I'm thinking about, you just talked about having for students to have an adult to talk to, but what if there isn't, or there are adults that don't want to talk about or talk with their students? So how do we elevate the importance of these conversations with members of our community about gender and inclusion, who might not see the importance right now?
I often approach this through a safeguarding lens. Again, we have seen these risks. This is not new. We have decades of evidence now to show that LGBTQ kids are at significantly higher risk than their cisgender heterosexual peers. And when we know that, that is a mandate for us as schools to act. If we are not contributing to the safety, if we can't provide a safe place for children, we're not even meeting the basic benchmark for what a school should be able to do. And so with that in mind, I think people who might have personal objections to LGBTQ identities, I would have to say, I don't know that they're ever necessarily going to be the go-to person for a child in need. But to say, you know, I might not understand this, but I see the importance from a professional lens that I need to keep my students safe. And this is something that I can do that will be impactful in that way.
Thank you. Ingrid, you have a question. Would you like to unmute and ask?
Thank you. Thank you. I do have a question. Andy and I both work in Morocco in a school, and I'm actually a biology teacher. I worked at Frankfurt International School before, so I have a comparison framework here for restrictions. And the reason we wanted to join today is we are both trying to correlate our programs in terms of physical education, health development, biology, and what we're getting. We're a newly set up school, and what we're getting is a conundrum of to what extent can we actually tackle the questions and the queries that students have when we're in a society that cisgender is the only gender that exists, where kids come up with questions that we have to table, because as a biology teacher, I'm not supposed to address them at all. And it feels very unauthentic. I mean, like I said, having worked at FIS, I could have openly spoken with children and brought in the parents as part of the conversation, but we have a situation where we might have students of a generation that sees gender identity as something and parents that don't. I don't know how else. So we're trying to see what tools can we put in place to make sure that we have a comprehensive program that honors student identity and more than safeguarding them, like acknowledges that there are these gender differences and they're just as valid. I don't know, Andy, if you want to add anything to that.
No, yeah, mine's just the same point as Ingrid. We're just looking how we integrate it into a program on the head of PE. So it's just in a new school within these cultures is just how do we fit this in to what we that's why we're here. We want to add it. It's just how do we do it in the right context that's not going to cause chaos, I don't know, or disruption.
Right. Well, I mean, I would like to spend more time with you to address that question, but I'll give you maybe a shortened answer for the sake of this particular program. So a couple of things. One is that you do want to be in communication with your leadership because unless you want to, I'm not asking any individual teacher to put themselves on the line and potentially get fired. Ideally, what we want is community support. And so to advocate for that, you might consider looking at it through an educational lens. So for example, I don't know where your school stands in terms of teaching evolution, for example, but a lot of schools will say, you know, we recognize that at home, you might believe or teach your family that evolution didn't happen. But because our school is based on, you know, sort of educational factual principles, we're just going to teach what we know as best as we know it from research-based materials, which do support evolution. Similarly, if we're thinking about teaching around gender and sexual identity, it's not a promotion kind of thing, like we're going to try to, you know, I think people are afraid that if we acknowledge that LGBTQ people exist. And by the way, I'm bi, so just full disclosure there. If we acknowledge that folks like me exist, then children will somehow turn LGBTQ. And so I think part of it is dispelling the fear of that and saying, look, we're not trying to convince anyone to be anything. We're just teaching the facts, which is that there are different genders, there are different sexual identities, there are even biological variations in what we consider sex. And these are just factual. And so we're just letting children know that this is true. And also, when we are in conservative contexts, we are still considered international schools. And I don't know the mission and vision of your particular school, but a lot of times the idea is that children will become sort of internationally minded, or we can call it different things, but that we're not restricted to one particular vision of how the world operates, rather that we allow children to experience or learn about lots of different viewpoints, and then they'll determine their own. And so when we don't allow kids to even learn that LGBTQ people exist, then we're not really setting them up to be successful in a world where LGBTQ people exist. So we're not quite living up to our school's mission and vision. The last thing I would say, again, I could spend a lot of time on this, but the last thing I would say is that even if this, the parents think parents or community members are sending their messages around gender and sexual identity, kids also have access to other forms of information. So I assure you, and I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't already know, that the kids are having these conversations themselves anyway. So we can let them do it as teenagers with TikTok or whatever is cool these days. I'm a little too old to know that, but they are happening, and we can let them happen at a teenage level. Who knows what that will lead to? Or we as professionals with access to actual, factual information can be part of that conversation and do it in a safe and structured way within a school environment, so that it's not just stuff that they're getting off the internet, which sometimes is great and sometimes is complete garbage. So those are a few points to address where you're at. But again, I would start by having that conversation with your leadership. Ideally, it's going to be much easier for you and for your students in the school as a whole if this is seen as a benefit to the institution and not just sort of like your individual passion project. Because at the end of the day, that's only going to go so far as you can take it on your own.
Yeah, I think we're actually here because we went to our leadership and they recommended that we listen to you. It's actually that way around. So this is
great. Super.
Pursued in the right direction.
Well, then this will be recorded. You could share it with them and then have a conversation after. And yeah, I'll be happy to support if you need anything. That's a short answer, but it's a starting point for discussion.
Thank you. It's very valuable. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thanks for the work you're doing and the advocacy you're doing.
Come along. There's still time to register, and there's still space to do presentations as well. So if you feel, you can even do something on the conversation you just had, and what your school's doing. That will really help, encourage a lot of other people in and across the 27 countries from where people are coming from. So yeah, I strongly advise, if your school hasn't let you yet, come to the conference. Thank you, Joe. It's happening soon.
And the conference will, I think, my work at the conference will speak really specifically to the inclusion in athletics. So we talked a bit more broadly here, but we'll look at trans inclusion in sports, which is a related and very niche topic at the same time. Everyone is welcome, and I think no judgment for any school that's just getting started. I think this is new for a lot of people, and so yeah, we just want to get people trained up, educated, so you feel confident that you're doing the right thing. Most of the times I work with people who are, they want to do the right thing and they just don't know what it is sometimes. And so I have a lot of empathy for that. And that's what we're trying to do, just get people upskilled and ready to go.